Hey guys. Tonight we're slipping quietly into the ink-stained sandals of a Byzantine librarian, a man of letters, scrolls, and probably lower back pain. You're tucked away in a monastery that smells faintly of beeswax and damp wool. Somewhere along the quiet edges of the Eastern Roman Empire. Outside, the sky is still that deep pre-dawn blue, with just enough light to silhouette the olive trees bowing in the morning breeze. You rise slowly from your straw-stuffed mattress, joints popping like a poorly bound codex. Your robes, still folded neatly at the foot of the bed, are stiff with yesterday's sweat and a bit of ink. No one warns you in librarian school that your robe's cuffs will permanently tint a soft shade of sepia. There's no mirror, of course, but you imagine you look reasonably human, minus the black smudge across your left cheek from where you passed out mid-sentence. Head on parchment. The bells haven't yet rung for matins. But you don't need them. You've long trained your body to wake at this hour. Ever since the abbot caught you dozing during morning chants and assigned you to extra bell duty. A task that has nothing to do with bells and everything to do with carrying buckets of rainwater. You swing your legs off the cot and the floor bites back. Cold stone. Always cold. You shuffle into your sandals, toeing aside the leather pouch of pumice you use to smooth rough parchment. It's the first tactile reminder of the day's coming duties. Smoothing, sanding, scribbling. You live among words, but not your own. Always someone else's words, someone else's prayers. Today, you suspect, will be no different. But that's the point, isn't it? In a world of imperial intrigue, barbarian whispers, and theological disputes that can end in exile, or worse, there's peace in routine. A kind of cozy insignificance. Your joints protest as you stretch. Arms outstretched to the timber beams above. Somewhere in the ceiling, something scurries. Rat? Squirrel? Very polite demon? Hard to say. You wash quickly, dipping your hands into a cracked basin filled by yesterday's rainfall, and use a bit of linen to wipe the grime from your face. It smells faintly of vinegar, your own blend, designed to ward off both disease and discouragement. Historians still argue whether monks in your order used vinegar as a disinfectant or merely as a mood enhancer. You think it's both. Today, it does neither. Once robed and as clean as one gets in the 10th century. You lift the lamp from the corner, shield its flame, and step softly into the corridor. Stone walls, smooth from centuries of touch. Guide your hand as you walk. You know these turns by heart. You don't need light. Your feet know every creak of the floorboards, every chip in the stone, every cold gust near the northern door that no one seems able to seal properly. You suspect it leads directly to Armenia. The scriptorium is locked, of course. You're not the only one who's had dreams of accidentally nibbling on a parchment edge during a particularly lean fast. So the library stays shut tight, closed with a large iron key you keep tucked beneath your mattress. You pass by Brother Milos on the way. He's already up, humming a hymn to himself as he waters the herbs in the cloister. He claims rosemary improves memory. You're not convinced. You forgot his name for 2 full years. He nods as you pass, his beard twitching with amusement. Sleep well, librarian? Better than the scroll of St. Basil, which you dropped in the cistern. You murmur. He chuckles. Still readable. Barely. Your banter is soft. Everything is soft here. Even the arguments are whispered. You have to argue softly when the walls are stone and echo like a cathedral. Past the cloister and into the antechamber. You pause here, where the scent shifts from damp plants to old parchment. It's a smell you find comforting. Though visitors wrinkle their noses, they don't understand. To you, the scent of vellum is like a lullaby. You pull the key from your sleeve and insert it into the heavy wooden door. It sticks, as it always does. You jiggle it, twice left, once right. That's the trick. The lock clicks. The scriptorium yawns open, cool, dark, and still, as if time itself pauses inside. No bird dares chirp through these walls. You hold your breath for a moment, not from reverence, but because something died in here once, a mouse. You think, and every now and then the scent lingers. But today, it's just ink, dust, and silence. You step in and close the door behind you. Let the day begin. You pass through olive-shadowed halls, trading sleepy gossip with a scribe who swears he saw an angel. You leave the scriptorium door just slightly ajar. You always do. It squeaks horrendously when closed all the way and has a bad habit of refusing to open again unless coaxed with holy water and an increasingly desperate chant. The hallway that stretches ahead is still mostly dark. Its stone floor uneven from generations of slippered feet passing by on silent errands, some holy, some decidedly less so. Overhead, narrow windows carved into the stone let in slivers of blue-gray morning, outlining the corridors in an ethereal haze. The air is still damp from last night's rain. You can smell it in the plaster, earthy and wet, like an old book left too long on a windowsill. You walk slowly now, savoring the stillness before the day fully unfolds. This is your favorite time. Not the chants, not the meals, not even the sacred act of copying the word. No, it's these strange twilight moments when the monastery is half asleep, and everyone you meet speaks in whispers, as if trying not to disturb a dozing saint. You turn a corner and nearly bump into Brother Stefanos, his arms full of papyrus scraps and his hood slipping back from his hair in wild disarray. He's wide-eyed, breathing hard, and not entirely focused on the physical realm. "Brother Librarian," he hisses. "You must listen. This is never a promising beginning. I was out near the olive trees, praying before lauds, and I saw," he leans in, breath trembling, "a winged figure in the grove, tall as two men, cloaked in firelight." You blink. Are you sure it wasn't Brother Emilian lighting the stove again? He glares at you, genuinely offended. It hovered. "Friend, perhaps Emilian's been eating less bread." But Stefanos isn't laughing. He looks pale, even for a man who spends most of his time hunched over ancient Coptic fragments by candlelight. You glance down at the papyrus now half scattered across the floor. Notes for a sermon on angels, of course. The irony isn't lost on either of you. Historians still argue whether Byzantine monks commonly experienced hallucinations due to fasting, or if these accounts were metaphorical. You, however, lean toward a third theory. Some people just want their life to feel a little more epic. You help him gather the scattered papers, taking a moment to sneak a glance at one. It's a beautifully drawn seraph, complete with 6 wings and very unfortunate feet. "Maybe go easier on the frankincense next time," you offer gently. Stefanos nods, clearly unconvinced. "It didn't speak," he mutters, almost disappointed. "But I felt it." You pat his shoulder. "You're lucky. The last angel I saw told me my Greek syntax was embarrassing." He chuckles despite himself, and you part ways at the fork near the chapel. He disappears into the misty light, still clutching his divine sighting and the hope that someone else will believe it without joking. You continue on, amused but not surprised. This is not the first angel spotted in the olive grove. It's at least the 3rd this month, which suggests either the monastery is truly blessed, or someone's fermenting the fig wine improperly. Your sandals slap softly against the flagstones as you pass by the kitchen, where the smell of bread has just begun to thread into the hallways. Your stomach growls instinctively. You're technically not supposed to eat until the 3rd hour. But Brother Menidoros the baker sometimes slips you a crust when no one's looking, provided you return his poetry scrolls without that telling smudge of grease on the margins. He says he writes poetry for Mary. You suspect it's for the steward's niece. You slip by the chapel doors, now open to the main nave, where a few elderly monks are already humming the opening tones of the morning hymn. You nod reverently, not stopping to join. You'll make your appearance at the 2nd hymn, the one you can half sing while pretending to meditate. Through the final corridor, the wall here is etched with faint carvings of vines and grapes, one of the older decorative remnants from before the last renovation. You trace your fingers across one gently. No one's quite sure if it's purely ornamental or if there was once a theological reason behind it. Maybe something about divine abundance. Or maybe the decorator just liked grapes. You make a mental note to ask Stefanos later. He'll probably claim it was carved by cherubim. As you near the central courtyard, soft golden light spills through a larger arched doorway. The sky is turning a pale apricot now, and you squint into the soft warmth. The garden beyond is still damp, dew clinging to the rosemary and thyme lining the edges of the stone path. The marble basin in the middle of the courtyard catches the light, glowing faintly like an unlit lantern. A pair of doves fuss quietly in its shadow. One of them pecks at a fig left half eaten on the rim, then waddles in a circle like it owns the place. Which, if we're being honest, it probably does. You pause for a moment, just breathing it in. This is your world. Damp stones, olive branches, old paper, errant doves, and wandering monks with visions. It may not be glamorous, it may not be remembered, but it's yours, and there's a certain sleepy dignity in that. You fumble with ancient iron keys, and the door creaks open to a room scented like dust and lamp oil. The scriptorium doesn't welcome you. It accepts you, begrudgingly. The thick wooden door resists at first, as if testing your resolve, then finally yields with a long, splintering groan. You step over the threshold, half expecting a gust of incense or perhaps a celestial choir. Instead, it's the usual cocktail of old dust, dry ink, and extinguished oil lamps, the divine ambiance of bureaucratic eternity. Inside, the room feels like it's holding its breath. Parchment bundles rest in uneven stacks. Scrolls sleep in cubbyholes carved into the stone wall like miniature tombs. Tall windows, too narrow for anything larger than a cat to crawl through, let in strained beams of light that fall like spotlights on random bits of chaos. A broken quill, a discarded wax seal, someone's misplaced slipper. You're not the only one with access to the scriptorium, but you are its keeper, its loyal steward, its overworked, underappreciated babysitter. So, naturally, the mess is your problem. First order of business: light the lamps. You fetch a taper and coax the flame to life from the stubby candle in your pocket lamp holder, a Byzantine fire starter's equivalent of a Zippo lighter. You touch flame to wick, wick to oil, and one by one the lamps flicker awake, casting long sleepy shadows on the walls. The room warms, just slightly, as if stretching after a long nap. You make your way to your usual desk. Not because it's comfortable, it isn't, but because the chair has been broken in just the right way so the back leans ever so slightly. You like to think it supports your spine, though it's more of a gentle mockery of posture than real relief. The desk is predictably cluttered. A half-finished copy of Galen's treatise on humors lies open, the marginalia increasingly desperate. You're fairly sure the last scribe to work on this one started inventing new organs out of spite. You set it aside and reach under the desk, pulling out your own current project, a botanical manual from an obscure Syrian monk who seemed deeply concerned with moss. There are 5 full pages devoted to moss, in 3 languages. Historians still argue whether such detailed monastic treatises were intended for practical use or simply as an excuse to avoid fieldwork. You're back, aching from a mere stroll across the courtyard. Votes fieldwork was enthusiastically avoided. You unfurl the scroll, smooth it with a sanded bone folder, and pull your tools closer. Your knife, used to sharpen quills and occasionally carve curses into your desk. Your ink, a surprisingly stable mixture, considering its components include wine sediment, soot, and something that may have been squid. And, of course, your quill, a stubby survivor with a wonky nib that you've grown weirdly fond of. You test it on a scrap, Olus Myrichs Rhiza. Still legible, barely. A quick glance at the guide sheet shows the next section is on medicinal roots. You begin transcribing, gentle curls of Greek letters flowing from ink to page. Your breath synchronized with the steady scrape of nib against parchment. Time slows here. Your hand finds rhythm, your shoulders relax, and your thoughts drift. Not far, just enough to imagine the Syrian monk who first penned this. You picture him knee-deep in marshes, talking to plants like they were incooperative goats. You admire his dedication, or madness. The line blurs often. A small crash interrupts your focus. You look up sharply. The culprit? A scroll has fallen from the shelf above. No earthquake, no wind, just gravity. That persistent old theologian. You pick it up carefully. It's one of the older texts. A commentary on Aristotle. Brittle as dried fruit leather. You whisper a quick apology to the scroll for your neglect. Then carefully return it to its proper cubby. Before you sit again, you notice something odd. A folded note tucked beneath your inkwell. It wasn't there earlier. It's sealed with red wax, unmarked. You glance around, but you're alone. The seal breaks easily. Inside, a single line, scribbled in hurried Greek. He returns. Prepare the cellar. You blink. That's not ominous at all. The cellar? No one uses the cellar. Not since the incident. You shake your head, tuck the note into your robe pocket, and make a mental note to pretend you didn't see it until after breakfast. More pressing matters await. The next section involves ground beetle paste and its alleged use in relieving gout. You sigh, dip your quill again, and begin writing. Your hand aches after only 5 lines. You stretch your fingers, eyeing the shelves across the room. How many more lives have been lived? Forgotten? Preserved in ink and guesses? You let your eyes drift over to the arched niche near the window. A place no one really uses. Just shadow and dust. And yet, something feels different. A faint smell, herbs? No, something muskier, older. You rise, drawn by a mix of curiosity and dread. You run a finger along the shelf. Dust, yes, but also something else. Scratched into the stone, nearly invisible unless the light hits just so, 3 Greek letters. Faded, etched long ago. Then, a name, or maybe an abbreviation, or maybe it's just graffiti from a bored novice. Still, it sits with you. The cellar, the name, the scroll that fell. You return to your chair. The seat now cooler than before. As if someone had recently stood up from it. You don't scare easily. But you decide to recite a brief protective prayer under your breath anyway. Just in case, you dip the quill once more. The moss isn't going to catalog itself. You begin transcribing a rare herbal manual while muttering a protective charm against scribal errors. You settle back into your slightly treacherous chair. Crack your knuckles, softly. It echoes in here like thunder. And roll out the manuscript scroll with a reverent sigh. This one's special. Rare, an herbal manual written by a long-forgotten monastic physician from the East. Passed down through ink-stained generations, all of whom had exactly the same terrible penmanship. The first few lines are devoted entirely to fennel and its supposed ability to make horses less moody. You briefly wonder how many horses were interviewed to validate that claim. You carefully trace the opening verse with your fingertip, murmuring aloud a small incantation as you prepare to copy it. Not quite a prayer, not quite a joke, just a habit passed from librarian to librarian. It's half rhyme, half threat. Let no blot fall, let no hand slip, by saints and ink. Preserve this script. You're not superstitious, of course. Just appropriately terrified, because the last time someone copied a passage from this herbal without the proper reverence. The entire scriptorium reeked of lavender and regret for a month. You dip your quill, the ink hesitating before sliding down its freshly trimmed nib. With a slow exhale, you begin. Anathon, Columenon Hediosman. The letters form under your hand. Steady as temple drums, you take care with the diacritics. Flicking each accent with the flair of someone who once dreamed of being a mosaic artist. The process is strangely hypnotic. You drift into a gentle cadence, dip, scratch, breathe, glance at the source, repeat. You become a vessel, a conduit, a human printing press, albeit one prone to cramping and philosophical daydreams. From time to time, you pause to sniff the ink. A bizarre habit, yes, but you've gotten good at detecting if it's turned sour. Today it smells fine, earthy, with a whisper of vinegar and what you suspect might be fermented plum. A good vintage. Outside the high window, a dove coos, then flutters, then coos again, more insistently. You sigh and toss a crumb from your robe pocket toward the sill. It misses. You both pretend it was on purpose. You're halfway through a paragraph on crushed marjoram as a cure for visions of demons, when you hear footsteps, light, hesitant, definitely monastic, approaching the scriptorium. You pause mid-stroke, the quill's tip frozen like a dancer and point. The door creaks open with the guilt of someone who knows they should have knocked. Apologies, whispers Brother Damianas. poking his head in like a shy tortoise. I left my wax tablet yesterday. Near the maps? You nod toward the far table, never lifting your hand from the page. He shuffles in, retrieves it, and just as quickly turns to leave. But before he goes, he turns back. Is it true, he asks, that this manual was once kept in the library at Alexandria? You glance up, amused. It's rumored, you reply. But then again, so is everything that's ever smelled vaguely of cumin. He chuckles, then whispers, still, imagine the hands that touched it. You do. Often. It's both humbling and weirdly disconcerting to think your fingers now trace the same lines as a monk who lived 8 centuries ago, and probably also had back problems and inconsistent margins. Once he's gone, you pick up again. Himmersheim 10 Echausen Reisen. You lean forward, candlelight glinting off your inkwell, and continue your delicate task. Every few lines, you add a small decorative flourish, nothing excessive, just enough to keep the page feeling loved. A twirl here, a leaf motif there, a tiny face in profile that may or may not look like Brother Stefano's. Don't worry, he'll never notice. The quirkiest part of the manual? So far, it's a note about crushed goose feathers boiled in mead to cure hiccups. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine remedy or a passive-aggressive prank by an annoyed apprentice. Either way, it made you smile. You pause and stretch, glancing over at the error wall, a sideboard where monks anonymously posted slips of parchment documenting their worst transcription mistakes. Some are classics, like replacing heal with hail, or confusing divine blessing with divine belching. One brave soul even mixed up sin and wine. You suspect it wasn't entirely accidental. You look down at your current line and check it thrice. So far, so good. No demonic wine blessings here. Your eyes drift toward the high shelves, rows of tightly rolled scrolls and stacked codices. All handwritten, all precious, all threatening to collapse with a sneeze. You wonder briefly what it would be like to organize them properly. To actually catalog them, to label the shelves. A dream, a fantasy, a reason to be accused of heresy for disrupting sacred chaos. Still, you make a mental note. One day, you'll try, maybe with colored string, or tiny bells, or a very persuasive argument to the abbot involving divine order and mild threats. Back at your desk, your candle flickers. You glance at it, narrowing your eyes. That's not a breeze from the window. That's the door. You turn your head slowly. No one's there. You rise, walk softly to the entryway, and peek out. Empty. The hallway's silent as a prayer. You close the door again. Not all the way, just enough to make the squeak polite. Then, back at your desk, you scrawl one final line. He physis tes graphes estin ho chronos. The nature of writing is time. You lean back, let out a breath. The light has shifted. Morning is fading into full day now. And your stomach reminds you that fennel for horses is not a valid substitute for breakfast. Time to find bread, maybe even warm. You stand, stretch, and, because you're a cautious soul, you whisper the charm again. Touching your fingertips lightly to the page. Let no blot fall, let no hand slip, by saints and ink. Preserve this script. You wink at the goose feather recipe and close the scroll with care. 2 scholars from Constantinople arrive unannounced, clutching scrolls and asking far too many questions. You barely make it to the refectory door when the gatekeeper finds you. His face is flushed, probably from the exertion of walking faster than a monk is strictly supposed to. You're holding half a crust of yesterday's bread, warm from a discreet reheat near the kitchen oven. When he grabs your sleeve, "There are visitors," he whispers, as if the very idea might summon lightning. From Constantinople. You blink at him. "Are they armed?" "No," he says, sounding disappointed, "but one of them is wearing shoes far too clean for someone trustworthy." That's all the warning you get. The visitors are already seated on the worn stone bench near the inner cloister, looking out of place the way a gilded icon looks in a henhouse. One is tall and thin, with the kind of posture that suggests he's never copied anything longer than his own name. The other is rounder, but his eyes dart everywhere, absorbing, judging, and, Worst of all, remembering. You approach cautiously, brushing crumbs from your robe and plastering on your most neutral expression. The one you usually reserve for theological disputes about punctuation. Peace be upon you, you murmur. And upon you, the tall one replies. You are the librarian? I maintain the scriptorium, you say. It sounds more modest, and therefore more defensible. We've come on imperial business. The rounder one says, and he produces a scroll as if it might spontaneously ignite if not read immediately. You take it, noting the wax seal. Plain. Red, but pressed with the double-headed eagle of the palace. Oh joy! His Grace, the logothete of the drome, the round one continues, requires assistance in locating comparative texts on dream interpretation, specifically those of Artemidorus of Daldes and certain Syriac derivatives attributed to. He's still talking. You skim the scroll. Bureaucratic lingo. Fancy ink. Margins too wide. The seal's authentic. Though, probably. Behind his words, you hear the other scholar sniffing. Literally sniffing. At the air. Is that lavender and goose fat? Herbal preservation mixture. You mutter. Very cutting edge. Historians still argue whether Byzantine scribes used fat-based bombs to preserve vellum or just to cover the smell of mildew and existential dread. You suspect both. You gesture toward the shaded cloister walk. We can speak inside. The scrolls don't care for sun. The tall one frowns. Are your vaults not protected? They are. From sun, not from questions. They follow, clicking slightly with every step. Those cursed clean shoes again. Inside the scriptorium, you notice both men immediately recoil slightly at the scent. A mix of old ink, oil, and ecclesiastical ambition. You, of course, find it comforting. You gesture to the work table. Set your scrolls here. They do. 5 in total. 1 wrapped in oilcloth. 1 tied with a ribbon far too festive for the topic. And 3 already fraying at the edges like anxious party guests. I assume you've already read these? You ask. Of course, says the tall one. No, says the round one. They glare at each other. You sigh. This is going to be fun. You glance at the first scroll. It's a fragment of a dream manual written in Syriac, sloppily translated into Greek, then retranslated, by someone with far too much confidence, into Latin. You try not to make a face. You fail. You know this says, if a lion eats your bread, it means you will be promoted to a donkey. The tall one nods solemnly. Yes, we wondered about that. You gesture to your own collection. We have 3 versions of Artemidorus. One glossed by a monk with a severe fear of goats. Another with astrological marginalia. And one that, I believe, was once used as a placemat. Fascinating, says the round one, already rifling through your scroll bins with the delicacy of a squirrel at a feast. You retrieve the annotated copy yourself. Carefully. It's your favorite, mostly because the marginalia slowly devolve into a series of doodles of eyes. Lots of eyes. Some are crying, some are suspicious, some, frankly, are winking. You're not sure what it all means. But it makes a nice companion to the very dry text. You spread it out gently and note the immediate spark in the round scholar's eyes. This, he whispers. This is the one. The tall one squints. Is that a cat in the margin? Yes, you say. She appears when people are lying about their dreams. You allow yourself one small joke. They don't laugh. Tough crowd. They pore over the manuscript like it holds the secrets of heaven. Occasionally asking questions you barely hear over the rising ache in your lower back. You catch snippets, symbolism of birds. Lunar associations. How to spell dolphin in Syriac if your ink is cursed. Standard stuff. Eventually, they request to borrow the text. You stare at them flatly. It's the only known copy of this edition. Copied by a monk who claimed to dream exclusively in geometric shapes. We'll return it. By Oxcott? They blink. You shake your head. No, but I'll copy it, if you pay in vellum, ink, and silence. They glance at each other. Nod. That's the best deal they'll get. They leave soon after. Shoes still far too clean. You watch them go, carrying dreams of dreams, returning to their world of imperial scrolls and perfect pronunciation. You return to your desk. where the herbal manual waits patiently. You sigh, lift your quill again, and whisper your charm. Let no blot fall, let no hand slip, by saints and ink. The door creaks softly as it shuts behind them. At lunch, you break bread with the steward and hear whispers about a monk secretly writing poetry. The midday sun filters lazily through the colonnade, painting the refectory in warm slats of light and shadow. The stone benches are still cool despite the heat outside. As if they disapprove of the sun's enthusiasm, you settle into your usual seat at the long table, just close enough to the kitchen to benefit from early seconds, and just far enough from the abbot to avoid conversation about canonical reforms. Brother Menodoros, the monastery's steward and unofficial keeper of everybody's secrets, plops down beside you with a grunt. His robe smells faintly of flour and thyme. He offers you a hunk of warm barley bread and a hard-boiled egg that has clearly seen better days. You nod in thanks. He nods like he's done you a favor worthy of eternal gratitude. Lunch in the monastery is quiet by design. Conversation is discouraged, unless it's scripture or announcements or someone choking. Today, however, Menodoros is feeling mischievous. You can tell by the way he leans in close, bread halfway to his mouth, eyes glinting. Have you heard? He murmurs. Depends. You whisper back. Are we talking heresy, Muscapide psalms, or someone stealing my rosemary soap again? He tears into the bread like it personally offended him. None of those. Poetry. You blink. That's allowed. Not this kind, he says, dropping his voice a full octave, like he's about to recite a banned scroll. Love poetry. You pause mid-chew. To whom? You ask. We have maybe 4 eligible candidates, and 2 of them are statues. He smirks. Brother Agapetos, you try very hard not to choke on your egg. The same Agapetos who once corrected my use of the aorist tense during lauds. The very same. Turns out he's been slipping verses under the cloister doors. Anonymous. Beautiful. Melancholy. Rhymed, too. You stare at him. Historians still debate whether monastic poets wrote in secret due to actual censorship or simply because their work was awful. You suspect Agapetos' case is complicated. Do we know who the muse is? You ask. Menodoros shrugs. Could be an icon. Could be Brother Stephanos. Could be metaphysical longing for divine union masked as terrestrial yearning. That old trick. You both lapse into silence. Chewing thoughtfully, a group of younger monks shuffles in and sits down across from you. One of them has ink on his cheek in the shape of a bird. You decide not to mention it. Outside, the wind picks up. A branch scrapes gently against the shuttered window. Somewhere, a bowl clatters to the ground, followed by a muttered curse, definitely not in Latin. After a few bites, Menodoros nudges you again. And get this, he whispers. He signed the last poem with a drawing. You raise an eyebrow. Of? A snail. You blink. Like, slow and cautious? He grins. Or armored and slimy. Interpretations vary. You laugh into your bread. The monastery isn't known for scandal, but it is known for overinterpreting very small things into very large problems. You make a mental note to check under your own door later. As the meal winds down, the steward excuses himself to speak with the cook about spoiled lentils, leaving you alone with your thoughts and the last heel of bread, which you offer to the sparrow eyeing you from the windowsill. He declines, probably waiting for the cheese. You sip from your cup of watered wine, tart, faintly sour, and oddly calming. It pairs surprisingly well with the egg. You wonder, briefly, how a Roman gourmand would judge this meal. Probably poorly. You notice one of the younger monks watching you with curious eyes. Not suspicious, just thoughtful. You give a small nod. He blushes and looks away. They always do. The younger ones seem to think you carry secrets, simply because you spend your days among forbidden books and marginal doodles. You do, of course. But mostly, they're secrets like, the best quills are trimmed from the left wing of a goose, or, never use red ink for a love letter unless you want to be accused of heresy. As the plates are cleared, the conversation dies down entirely. The midday bell tolls softly, echoing through the vaulted ceiling like a suggestion rather than a command. Time to return. You stand, joints creaking like a neglected door hinge, and stretch slightly. The light catches a smear of ink on your sleeve. From earlier? From yesterday? From 947 AD? Hard to tell. Before you leave the refectory, you pass by the notice board near the exit. A new sheet has been pinned, an announcement about upcoming illumination duties. Volunteers wanted, or rather, volunteers invited, which in monastic language means you'll be doing this whether you like it or not. You smile faintly. At least it's not candle duty again. Last time, you nearly set the hymnals on fire with your enthusiasm. Stepping outside, the breeze catches your robe like a sail. You pull it close, crossing the courtyard under the watchful eyes of stone saints and gently crumbling arches. The day is warmer now. Cicadas begin to murmur in the hedges. You pass a novice sitting with a wax tablet, squinting and mouthing something silently. Memorizing psalms, or perhaps composing his own verse about cloister windows and poetic snails. Back in the corridor toward the scriptorium, you notice something odd. A folded bit of parchment lies in front of your door. No seal, no marking. You pick it up cautiously. Inside, one line, written in delicate, hurried Greek. Even stone hearts dream of ivy. You smile. Maybe Agapetos has competition. An imperial scroll arrives, sealed with wax, requesting a banned text you definitely do not have. You've barely taken 3 steps into the scriptorium when you see it, propped neatly against your inkwell. Right where your elbow would have crushed it if you'd been any less late. The scroll is thick, wrapped in fine linen, and sealed in bright red wax stamped with a crest you recognize immediately. A double-headed eagle clutched around a sword and a scepter. You groan aloud, already knowing this is not going to be good for your afternoon. You sit, carefully. The scroll practically hums with expectation, as if the parchment itself knows it's too official to be ignored. You break the seal, the wax cracking with a sound like dry bread, and unroll it with theatrical reluctance. The text is written in a fluid, courtly hand, far too elegant for your liking. Elegant letters usually mean trouble. To the esteemed librarian of the monastery at St. Heliodoros. In accordance with the decree of the Imperial Chancellery and at the express request of His Radiant Highness Theophanes Logothetes. You are hereby instructed to provide a complete and unabridged copy of the manuscript known in clerical circles as the Treatise of Shadows by one John the Wanderer. You stop reading, immediately. The Treatise of Shadows is a text that doesn't technically exist. More accurately, it existed, briefly, in the collection of a scholar who was later accused of dabbling in forbidden mysticism. Promptly exiled to a remote island, where he reportedly talked to birds. And whose works were quietly, completely, very thoroughly banned, and now someone wants it. From you. You glance around the scriptorium instinctively. As though the scroll might have been left here by mistake. As though you're being watched. But no. Just you, the shelves, the dust, and that one pigeon who keeps trying to nest in the window lintel. You read further. The tone gets worse. It is understood that the monastery's scriptorium possesses or has at one time had access to said manuscript or relevant fragments. Under the classification Codex Obscurus 19, the Chancellery expects your cooperation. Non-compliance will be regarded as deliberate obfuscation. Of course it will. You fold the scroll and exhale deeply. You haven't seen Codex Obscurus 19 in years. Not since Brother Jacobos tried to translate it and ended up speaking in rhymed couplets for a week. Charming at first, terrifying by day 3. Historians still argue whether John the Wanderer was a mystic, a fraud, or simply a very confused herbalist who used too many metaphors. What's certain is that his work is dense, cryptic, and filled with phrases like the blood of moonlight, and ink that dreams. The kind of writing that makes censors twitch. You rise slowly and move to the far side of the scriptorium, past the herbal texts. Beyond the zoological bestiaries, behind the shelf of scrolls marked excessive allegory, there's a narrow cupboard tucked into the wall. It's barely taller than your waist, and the wood groans with age. You unlock it with a small key you wear around your neck. One you haven't used in over a decade. Inside, dust, a cracked lamp, 2 unlabeled scrolls, And one codex. Black leather. Brittle spine. No title. Codex Obscurus 19. You don't touch it. Instead, you stare at it, like it might blink. It doesn't, of course. That would be ridiculous. But just to be safe, you close the cupboard again. Slowly, you return to your desk. The imperial scroll still taunting you like a badly written riddle. What do they want with the treatise? Who is this Radiant Highness? And more importantly, why now? You chew the inside of your cheek, thinking you could copy the introduction and omit the more evocative parts. Replace Moon's Lament with Sunlight Reflection. Swap blood-spoken ink for crimson pigment. Who would notice? Then again, imperial scribes are trained to sniff out euphemisms like hounds on a scent. No, this is too risky. But ignoring the scroll would be worse. You rub your temples. This is not what you became a librarian for. You signed up for quiet mornings, illegible Syriac, and the occasional spider in the ink pot, not occult diplomacy with the Byzantine bureaucracy. You glance at the notice board across the room. Someone's added a new parchment, a schedule for candle refill duty. You consider volunteering. It seems less flammable than this. Instead, you do what any wise monastic scholar would. You fetch a fresh parchment, light a clean candle, and begin drafting the most ambiguous, careful, evasive response you can legally compose without committing perjury. To the most radiant and illustrious highness, peace and clarity be upon your endeavors. Regarding the item in question, the monastery is currently reviewing its archival inventories in accordance with ancient protocols of preservation and transcription. Due to the delicate nature of older texts, including those attributed to apocryphal or speculative origins, an assessment is ongoing to ensure fidelity to doctrinal standards. It goes on like this. Paragraphs of saying very little in many words. You don't lie, but you don't quite tell the truth either. You seal the letter with the monastery's modest emblem, a stylized fish, and place it in the outgoing scroll bin, where it will be picked up at sundown by the same donkey who delivers fermented fig paste and very outdated gossip. Then, and only then, do you open the codex. Just briefly. Inside the front cover, in spidery Latin, is a note you'd forgotten about. To read this is to dream. To copy it is to bleed. You close it again. That seems like enough curiosity for one afternoon. You sneak into the forbidden cellar, searching for a legendary manuscript no one admits exists. By late afternoon, the light has taken on that golden honey hue that makes even dust motes look majestic. But you're not basking in it. You're eyeing the cellar door from the shadows of the corridor like a thief. One who knows exactly where the creakiest floorboard is and steps over it with practiced ease. Technically, you're not allowed down there without the abbot's permission. Technically, you're also not supposed to know that Codex Tenebris, the supposed twin to the infamous Treatise of Shadows, is rumored to be somewhere below. But no one ever said curiosity wouldn't win. The door to the cellar is tucked behind an old tapestry of the Annunciation. Faded threads. Gabriel's wings look more like damp towels now. You nudge the fabric aside and reach for the iron latch hidden in the wall's seam. Click. It opens with a reluctant groan. Like the building itself disapproves of your choices. A narrow stairwell spirals down, each step slick with age and the occasional blob of wax from candles long extinguished. You hold a taper out before you, watching its tiny flame tremble as the air cools, thickens. You descend. The air smells of mildew, chalk, and something faintly metallic. Not blood, not wine, just history. Condensed, bottled, and poorly ventilated. Your sandals scuff gently against stone as you reach the bottom. You're greeted not by rows of books, but by barrels, old wine, older vinegar, and jars of what may once have been olives. This part of the cellar was never intended for texts. But if the rumors are true, the manuscript isn't on the shelves, it's inside the wall. Historians still argue whether Byzantine monks ever walled up texts to protect them from imperial confiscation or simply because the abbot didn't like the author. In this case, the story goes that a particularly nervous librarian during the iconoclast controversy sealed the codex behind a brick panel, for safekeeping. You circle the chamber, trailing your hand along the rough stone. There, near the western wall, your fingers catch on a thin seam. You crouch and bring your taper close. The seam runs in a perfect rectangle, about the size of a large codex. Barely noticeable unless you know what you're looking for. You press. Nothing. You press harder. Still nothing. You sigh. Lean your full weight into it, and the stone shifts. Not much. Just a whisper of motion. Enough. With a soft scrape, the brick panel slides back a few inches, revealing a narrow niche. Dust swirls in the candlelight, disturbed for the first time in maybe 100 years. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather and tied with frayed twine, is something unmistakably book-shaped. You hesitate. Then you reach in. The leather cover is dry and crumbling, the twine stiff with age. You lift it gently. It's heavier than expected, the kind of weight that implies regret. You bring it to the table in the center of the room, a table no one has used in your memory, and unwrap it slowly. There it is, Codex Tenebris. You're not supposed to know its name, but the title is etched on the first page in deep black ink. The Latin curling like a serpent. Codex Tenebris. De Umbris. De Vocibus. De Somnis. The Book of Shadows, of Whispers, of Voices, of Dreams. You flip through the first few pages. Not quickly, not recklessly, just enough to confirm what you feared. Diagrams, circles, layers of overlapping symbols, words like veil, mirror, hollow, and door. And in the margins, notes in different hands. Different centuries. One reads, "Do not read aloud past page 73. Another, copied once in Thessalonica. Reader vanished. You close the book. Not slammed, just firmly. You wrap it again and return it to its hiding place, resealing the bricks with a firm push and a whispered apology to whoever watches over forbidden knowledge. Because some things are better left unread, especially when the footnotes seem to watch you. You climb the stairs more quickly than you descended, your taper flickering wildly with each step. At the top, you emerge back into the sunlight corridor. The tapestry falls back into place behind you. You pause, breathe, and pat the stone wall gently. Still there. You whisper. You brush yourself off. You smell like vinegar, dust, and a hint of mild panic. You walk away, just as Brother Stefanos turns the corner. He squints at you. You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, you mutter, "I've seen bad Latin calligraphy." He laughs, thankfully, and continues on. Back in the scriptorium, you relight your main lamp and return to your desk. The herbal scroll is still there. Patient, unassuming. You dip your quill, but pause. You glance at your fingernails. Black smudge. You rub it away. At least, you think it rubs away. Storm clouds roll in, dripping onto priceless vellum, and you improvise with pots, towels, and hope. You hear it before you see it, the subtle shift in sound that means the weather is about to turn. The doves in the cloister fall silent. The breeze stiffens, and from the high slit windows above the scriptorium, a single drop of rain hits the sill with a sound far too heavy to be innocent. You glance up just as another droplet slaps the stone floor beside your desk, spreading like spilled ink. "Oh no," you whisper. You rise from your chair with all the speed a monk of your age and diet can manage. You're already muttering under your breath. Not prayers, those come later. These are the frantic incantations of someone who knows their entire week's work is one leak away from destruction. The scriptorium roof is, generously speaking, vintage, despite multiple patch jobs involving wax, resin, and once a very brave cat. The tiles above the north end still conspire to weep rainwater directly onto your most vulnerable scrolls. You dart across the room, nearly sliding in your haste, and grab the nearest piece of canvas you keep stashed under your desk precisely for moments like this. It's stiff, fraying, and smells vaguely of goat. But it'll do. Climbing onto the bench, you stretch up toward the trickle now forming a miserable little waterfall over shelf 3B. The canvas slaps into place. It immediately begins to sag. "Not today," you mutter, trying to wedge one of the candle holders behind it as a makeshift gutter. Outside, thunder rolls like a judgment. You race back to your desk. Yank open the supply drawer. And retrieve your emergency rain kit, 3 clay pots, 2 towels, and a particularly absorbent wool sock you've never dared return to its rightful owner. Historians still argue whether Byzantine monasteries had formal water protocols. You suspect they did, but only in the same way they had formal cheese storage. Theoretical. Revered and ignored during storms. You arrange the pots under the worst leaks. One thunks as a drop lands. Then another. Soon, they're plinking like a badly tuned zither. You throw the towel over the codex nearest the breach. It's the one on musical theory, ironic. Really. Then you grab the last remaining precious item, your lunch scroll. Not that it's edible. Just a bit of scratched parchment where you'd started composing a satirical hymn about snails and celestial bureaucracy. But it has sentimental value. You cradle it to your chest like a relic. Lightning flashes. The windows strobe white, followed by a thunderclap that rattles your quill stand. You flinch, knock over your inkpot, then catch it, barely, before it topples onto your still drying herbal pages. You offer a breathless prayer to the patron saint of scribes and clumsy elbows. Probably Cassiodorus, or whoever drew the first marginalia duck. Rain pours harder now. The room smells of old stone, wet wool, and tense resolve. The canvas tarp above shelf 3B begins to bulge like a bladder. You tap it with the end of your quill. Water dribbles down the side and into the pot below. Satisfying. For now. You collapse into your chair. Heart pounding slightly. Sweat clinging to your collar. You pull your hood back and wipe your brow with a sleeve that is now, unfortunately, even damper. A few moments pass. The storm continues its performance, less fury. More endurance now. A sustained percussion. You take a deep breath. This is the part of the day that tests your faith, not in God, but in architecture, and in towels. You glance to the shelf of lesser-used texts and wince. A few are already damp. You shuffle over, rearranging them in a flurry, blowing gently on each as if your breath could reverse water damage. You prop one open on the windowsill, trusting the draft to help. One scroll has begun to curl. It hisses softly as you unroll it, like an old man disturbed from a nap. You apologize. Not that it helps. You notice a corner of the ceiling where the paint has bubbled. Possibly a fresco underneath. Possibly just mold with ambitions. You make a note. Check ceiling when not raining. You return to your desk and finally sit. Body aching in a dozen unpoetic ways. You lean back. Let your head tilt toward the ceiling. Rain taps its rhythm. Plink, plunk, drip. You begin humming along. It's an old chant, one you learned as a novice. No one sings it anymore. It's in an old dialect that sounds like you're arguing with your own echo, but it comforts you. As you hum, you notice something. A movement, barely perceptible. You lean forward. The edge of a scroll on the top shelf is twitching. No breeze. No obvious drip. You frown and climb the ladder, groaning softly as your knees complain. You reach out, gently. It's not the scroll that's moving. It's something inside it. You freeze, then unroll the scroll slightly. A beetle. A large one. You stare at it. It stares back, or seems to. You don't speak beetle, but the message is clear. This is my scroll now. You sigh. Fine, but no chewing on verbs. You roll it back up and set it further away from the leak, hoping the beetle prefers poetry over botany. You descend, kneel to reposition a pot, and finally, feel the storm begin to pass. The rain slows. The thunder fades to distant grumbling. The light softens again. You stand in the middle of the room, surrounded by clay pots, damp towels, and salvaged wisdom. You look around. It's not beautiful, but it's yours. You walk to the back of the scriptorium, retrieve the last dry candle, and light it in honor of the day's small victory. And maybe, just maybe, in honor of that brave wool sock, you get roped into a late afternoon debate over logic, and someone inevitably brings up the Latins. You don't intend to end up in another philosophical ambush. You really don't. But it's late afternoon. The storm has passed. The pots are still catching the occasional drip, but the air smells like drying parchment and the guilty peace that comes after almost losing something valuable. You're finally sitting down with a cup of lukewarm barley tea when Brother Leontios appears in the doorway. His expression just slightly too polite to be trusted. "Ah, Brother Librarian," he says, folding his hands in that very precise way that suggests a trap cloaked in civility. "Would you happen to have a copy of Aristotle's On Interpretation that's not entirely annotated in rhymed verse? You know the one he's referring to. It's been translated by a particularly enthusiastic monk whose idea of clarification was to turn everything into a limerick. You tried to read it once. You woke up with a nosebleed. I do, you say cautiously, but it bites." Leontios smiles. "That's fine. I'm simply leading a small discussion. Brother Agapetos has questions about logic and truth statements. And implications. Oh no. And he insists that syllogisms are boring. Oh no. Would you join us? You don't want to. You really don't. But the look in his eyes says, come now." Before Brother Agapetos reinvents logic using barnyard metaphors. So, moments later, you find yourself in the side cloister with 3 monks, 2 scrolls, and a rising sense of foreboding. Agapetos is already mid-argument. "I just don't think a statement has to be true to be useful." He's saying, "What matters is whether it feels elegant." You're describing poetry. You mutter, sitting down on the bench. "Exactly," he beams, as if you've proven his point. You sip your tea and brace for the incoming storm, this time made of syllables. Leontios unrolls the clean copy of On Interpretation. Aristotle suggests that an affirmation or negation must necessarily correspond to reality in order to be evaluated as true or false. But what if reality is subjective? Agapetos says, raising an eyebrow like a man who once read 2 sentences of Plotinus and never recovered. You close your eyes. Don't say, subjective, not without defining it first. He grins. What if I feel that reality includes unicorns? I feel that logic should include a silence rule after 2 cups of tea. You reply. Historians still argue whether monastic logic debates were ever truly productive or simply a socially acceptable way of arguing about feelings through Aristotle. You lean toward the latter. It's therapy, but with syllogisms. Brother Stephanos joins in with a cautious voice. If unicorns were logically possible within a given framework. Here we go, you murmur. Then within that constructed framework, a statement affirming them could be true in a local sense. Leontios groans softly. That's not what truth means. It is in poetry. Agapetos says, not helping. You glance down at your cup. Empty. A tragedy. You rise. Slowly. If anyone needs me, you say, I'll be refilling this and pretending this conversation didn't happen. But you don't leave just yet. Because someone, probably Stephanos, mentions the Latins. Of course, the Latins redefined propositional logic. He says, innocently, their entire framework differs from Aristotle's insistence on bivalence. And just like that, the mood changes. There's a sacred balance in Byzantine monastic discussion. You can challenge theology. Question grammar. Even critique an abbot's haircut, if you're brave. But the moment someone starts praising the Latins, well, Agapetos frowns. They also believe the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Son. Leontios stiffens. We're discussing logic, not procession. I'm just saying. Agapetos mutters. It's a slippery slope. You sigh. Let's not do this again. The last time someone mentioned Latin logic, a scribe refused to share his ink for a week out of protest. Brother Stephanos holds up a hand. I'm not advocating heresy. I'm merely pointing out that Boethius's version of Aristotle is different. And wrong. Agapetos adds. Not wrong. Just. Interpretively corrupt. Leontios mutters. You rub your temples. You're all missing the point. Logic isn't meant to win arguments. It's meant to clarify them. But winning is clarifying. Agapetos says. That's called sophistry. You reply. He smiles. Only if I lose. The sun has begun to slant low now, casting long shadows over the cloister floor. The leaves overhead rustle with a knowing hush. Birds chirp faintly, as if hoping someone will finally change the subject. You sigh again and lean back against the cool stone. I once read a scroll. You say, where a philosopher argued that logic was like a net. Good for catching fish, but not for swimming. They stare at you. That philosopher, you continue, was drunk. Agapetos claps once. I love him already. The debate continues, of course, meandering into semantics, metaphors, and whether a hypothetical chicken that has never laid an egg is still a chicken, in essence. You tune most of it out. Instead, you watch the light fade, the tea cool, and the sky shift gently toward dusk. Because some truths, unlike propositions, don't need to be argued. They just are. As dusk falls, you correct yesterday's marginalia by firelight, lamenting your own sloppy Greek. By the time you finally make it back to the scriptorium, the light outside is stretched thin like worn linen, soft, golden, and just beginning to surrender to violet. It slants through the windows at an angle that flatters the dust motes, as though the whole room is quietly glowing. You light the evening oil lamp with your last stub of taper and settle in for the loneliest hour of a librarian's life, corrections. The scroll in question lies waiting on your desk like a wounded animal. It's the botanical one, the same you spent hours transcribing yesterday. Now back from the reviewing monk with a string of notes that would make a lesser man cry. And by notes, of course, you mean passive-aggressive squiggles in red ink and one very dramatic question mark next to the word you'd written for dandelion. In your defense, the original was half-faded and you were very hungry at the time. You unroll the scroll and lean forward, groaning softly as your knees protest. Your quill is already sharpened. The ink has cooled to that perfect evening consistency, just thick enough to dry fast, but not sticky. You take a deep breath and begin. The firelight casts your shadow over the scroll as your hand dances back over yesterday's work. Correcting, smoothing, replacing a careless epsilon with a neat one, repairing the rhythm of your phrasing with quiet discipline. You whisper the words aloud as you write, not for show, but for focus. There's something about hearing the ancient Greek roll off your tongue that helps you anchor the syntax. Or at least convince yourself that you're not completely butchering it. Leon tu botanu, you mutter. No, that's lion of the garden. I meant, leaf of the meadow. You sigh. Again. Historians still argue whether Byzantine copyists were expected to have perfect Greek or simply good penmanship. Judging by the margins of most older scrolls, the answer is neither. Consistently. The worst part? You recognize your own handwriting from years ago, tucked beside a phrase you now can't even decipher. See alternate version in the blue codex. Page, ? Single quote. You trail off, staring at your own past indecision, and laugh dryly. Thanks. Past me. Very helpful. The candle beside you flickers. You adjust its position, mindful of soot. One errant puff and you'll have to clean the whole margin with powdered pumice again. You've already worn down one entire sleeve from that particular duty. You continue the corrections in silence, interrupted only by the occasional grunt as you shift your posture, or the soft rustle of a mouse investigating the basket under your desk. You don't even flinch anymore. You've made peace with the mice. They nibble the crumbs you forget to sweep. You don't rat them out to the kitchen. It's a delicate truce. You reach the final paragraph and pause. There's a phrase that stumps you entirely. Gnosis tu philou, knowledge of the leaf? But that makes no sense. Not in this context. You tilt your head, then your entire body, as if a new angle might reveal a new meaning. Nope, still gibberish. You check the reference text. There's a long line scratched out. Then, in a different hand, possibly refers to sap wisdom, or the wetness of logic. You blink. You blink again. Well, that's terrible. You whisper. You stare at it for another moment. Then scratch a note of your own. Revisit after wine and or sleep. The clock bell tolls softly in the distance. The hour of compline. But you stay seated, because now that the scroll is unrolled, and the room is warm, and the day is behind you, there's something comforting about simply sitting in silence with old words. You lean back, let the firelight play over your hands. You flex your fingers, sore from writing but oddly satisfied. You look at the corrected scrolls, not perfect, but better, cleaner, like polishing history with ink. Then, of course, comes the dreadful realization. You forgot to check the backside. You flip the scroll and groan. There it is. The glossary of rare herbs you copied too quickly after lunch. The first entry? Frog root. Good for dreams. Bad for goats. You blink. You definitely did not write that. You scan the margin. A doodle. A frog. Tiny. With an expression of knowing guilt. You stare into its little eyes. You again. You say aloud. Brother Stefanos strikes again. You think. Or maybe Agapetos. Having a laugh. You should be annoyed. But you smile instead. You leave the frog. Not out of laziness but as a warning. Or an inside joke with the future. Or maybe just because it's too perfect to erase. The scroll rolls up neatly. Your corrections drying in the golden hush. Outside, the sky fades to indigo. You lean on your elbows. Lamp still flickering. Scroll still safe. Your Greek is still inconsistent. But your heart, somehow, feels a little more orderly. You whisper the old charm one last time tonight. Let no blot fall. Let no hand slip. And you smile. Because even if it does, someone will correct it tomorrow. Midnight prayers approach. But two novices are still secretly illuminating saints' noses with gold leaf. The scriptorium should be quiet now. Should be. The hour is late. Your candle's flicker is more stutter than flame. And the air has cooled into something soft and watchful. Somewhere beyond the cloisters, the bells have rung for Compline, and most of the monastery has dissolved into silence and sleep. You rise slowly from your desk, stretching the stiffness from your back, and take your lamp in hand. It's time for final rounds, an unofficial duty you've somehow inherited. You're not entirely sure how. One day you were just the librarian, and the next you were the one who knew which novices were sneaking into the scriptorium after dark to practice lettering and borrow gold leaf. You cross the room in slow, quiet steps, your sandals whispering across the stone. The far end of the scriptorium, where the illumination tables rest under the arched windows, is still faintly aglow, not from your lamp, not from moonlight, from a candle, 2 candles, actually, shielded, muffled, but unmistakably lit. You approach in silence, letting your footfalls announce your presence only at the last second. The reaction is predictable. One novice, probably Methodios, judging by the too short robe, yelps and bumps the table. The other, a jittery beanpole named Callistos, attempts to casually slide a small gold dish under his sleeve. It clinks. Loudly. Evening. You say mildly. They both freeze. We were, testing pigment consistency. Methodios blurts. On St. Simeon's nostrils? You ask. Peering at the miniature they've been working on. It's exquisite. To be fair, clean lines. Symmetrical flourishes. And yes, 2 radiant golden nostrils that gleam with the fervor of a minor miracle. It's a technique? Callistos offers, eyes wide with pleading innocence. You say nothing. You're trying very hard not to laugh. You fail. Just a little. You know. You begin. There was a scribe once. Back in the 8th century. Who gave Saint Mark diamond-shaped pupils. Claimed it was to express divine omnivision. They blinked. He was reassigned to stable maintenance for a year. Methodios swallows. You sigh and sit beside them, setting your lamp on the table. Let me see it. They slide the illumination forward like 2 students presenting forbidden sweets to a forgiving uncle. It's not bad. In fact, it's excellent. The ink is even, the lines steady, and the gold leaf, while excessive in the nasal region, is applied with surprising delicacy. You run your finger near the edge. Not sticky. Good. Historians still debate whether monasteries truly encouraged illumination as spiritual expression or simply tolerated it because it made the pages too pretty to burn. You lean toward the former, provided no one tries to gild a goat again. This page is clean, you say, nodding. But remember, the saints are not to be mocked. We weren't mocking, Callistos says quickly. We just wanted them to shine. You nod. You get it. It's the same instinct that drove you to draw a tiny fish in the corner of that Syriac psalter years ago. It's a desire to add something. To honor with beauty, even if that beauty ends up on someone's holy nose. Clean up the brushes. You murmur. Return the gold leaf. And for heaven's sake, don't breathe on it until it dries. They nod furiously and scramble to obey. You lean back, watching them move with awkward reverence. In the flickering candlelight, they look like tiny saints themselves, nervous, luminous, full of mischief and awe. You glance at the page again. The image depicts Saint Simeon holding a book, his robes cascading in delicate folds of carmine and lapis. His face is solemn, his eyes kind, his nose radiant. You sigh again, this time with a strange affection. Saint Simeon, you whisper, you'd better appreciate this. You rise, stretch your spine again, and retrieve the towel you keep nearby for drying inkpots. You hand it to Callistos, who bows with the gravity of a man receiving a holy relic. Finish soon, you say, starting toward the door. The abbot gets twitchy when candles are lit past midnight. Will you report us? Methodios asks, his voice small. You pause. No, you reply, but if you gild St. Paul's beard again, I'll pretend not to recognize you. You leave them to their quiet chaos, shutting the door gently behind you. The hallway is dark now, lit only by the last embers of moonlight leaking through the high windows. You walk slowly, lamp in hand, listening to the familiar creaks of wood, the whispers of wind, and the tiny sighs the building makes as it settles for the night. Back in your chamber, you set the lamp on the stand and lower yourself onto the straw-stuffed mattress with the grace of a man twice your age. Your knees protest. Your back declares mutiny. You ignore them both. You stare at the ceiling, picturing that illuminated page. You think about Methodios' careful hands, Callistos' wide-eyed devotion, the absurd glory of a golden nose. You think about all the pages you've touched, all the words you've copied, all the errors you've caught and missed. And you wonder, not for the first time, if someone centuries from now will see your work and smile, even if only because of a tiny, gleaming mistake. A prized book has gone missing, and the abbot suspects the gardener, or maybe you. You don't notice anything wrong at first. The morning begins like any other, cold, quiet, a bit of damp in the joints. You wake slowly, brush the scroll dust from your robe, and sip tepid barley tea while staring at a patch of wall that you've long suspected might be trying to become a window. It's not until you return to the scriptorium, fresh candle in one hand, new to-do list in the other, that you sense it. An absence. Not a loud one, not yet, but you've spent so long among these shelves that you know immediately when something's missing. It's like hearing silence in the middle of a familiar song. You scan the room. Everything looks normal, chaotic. Yes, but normal. Scrolls are stacked, ink pots capped. The usual suspicious beetle near the window appears to be asleep. But one cubby, high on the third shelf, stands empty. The space where that codex usually sits. You feel your stomach drop with the grace of a brick. The codex in question isn't flashy. It doesn't contain prophecies, hidden gospels, or even anything particularly heretical. But it is the monastery's only complete copy of Cassiodorus's commentary on the Psalms, an unusually well-preserved version with clean Latin, marginalia that actually makes sense, and a frontispiece that looks suspiciously like St. Augustine riding a donkey backward, a mystery no one has solved. But everyone agrees is delightful. And now, it's gone. You check again. You remove the scroll beside it. Nothing tucked behind, nothing fallen, no note. You stare at the empty slot as if it might apologize. It doesn't. You pace once, twice, then you go straight to the abbot. He greets you with his usual expression, somewhere between mild curiosity and unsweetened porridge. You explain, calmly but with increasing volume, that the Cassiodorus Codex has vanished. He raises an eyebrow. Are you certain it's missing? He asks. No, you say. I just enjoy reporting imaginary thefts for fun. He doesn't smile. You take a deep breath. Yes, it's missing. He folds his hands. Then we must consider the possibilities. You wait. He's thinking, very slowly. Could it have been borrowed without record? Unlikely. You've reminded us 17 times this month to record everything short of breathing. Could it have been misplaced? I would misplace a candle, not the codex. He exhales. Then it may be theft. There's a beat of silence as that word echoes in the stone room like a dropped spoon in a chapel. You clear your throat. We're not exactly in the habit of criminal behavior. The abbot sighs and says the words you hope he wouldn't. We should question the gardener. Ah, of course. Historians still argue whether medieval monastic gardens were staffed by silent saints or nosy amateurs with suspicious soil under their fingernails. Yours leans toward the latter. Brother Olympos is many things: devoted, punctual, terrifyingly good at pruning, but a book thief? You're not convinced. Still, you find him in the herb plot, elbow deep in lavender and muttering to his thyme bush. You explain the situation. He listens, blinking slowly. I don't even read Latin. He says flatly. You don't need to read it to steal it. I can't even hold a book with these hands. He adds, raising two gnarled claws that look better suited to wrestling shrubs than turning pages. You sigh. It's not an accusation, just an inquiry. Then I inquire whether you've checked under your own pile of unfinished translations. Fair enough. You return to the scriptorium and double-check. Then triple-check. No codex. Just a few misfiled scrolls. 3 dried fig pits. And one note to yourself that says, ask Menidoros why he's hiding the ink sharpener again. You expand your search. Refectory? Nothing. Chapel? A nervous novice. Kitchen? Half a page of psalm text. Being used as a bread wrapper, you rescue it with only mild scolding. Still no codex. Then, in a moment of wild inspiration, you check the laundry alcove. And that's when it hits you. Not the codex. The memory. 3 days ago, Brother Agapetos was spotted, unusual for him, without his usual over-embroidered satchel. And he had mentioned researching psalmic structures for a new poetic cycle. You find him easily. He's in the cloister garden, reading a scroll and pretending not to notice the pigeon that has claimed his shoulder as a nesting site. Agapetos, you begin. Do you happen to know where the Cassiodorus Codex might have wandered? He looks up. Far too innocent. Cassiodorus? That doesn't sound familiar. You stare. He sighs. Dramatically. Fine. I borrowed it. I meant to record it. But then the register was missing. And then Brother Stephanos needed help translating a dream about bees. And, you hold up a hand. Where is it now? He blinks. In my room. Under my mattress. Why? In case of damp. You stare harder. He shrugs. It's a very precious book. You retrieve it within the hour. It's unharmed, save for a slight compression along the spine and one stray crumb that appears to be roasted chickpea. You return it to its rightful place, exhaling slowly as it slides into the shelf with a quiet, satisfying thump. Later, the abbot nods when you report the resolution. So, he says, not the gardener. No, you reply, just poetry. He mutters something under his breath about how the Latins would have labeled it treason. You don't argue. You're just glad it's back. And also, very quietly, you plan to start hiding your own satchel in increasingly clever places. Just in case the codex goes missing again. You visit the chapel, reflecting on lost time, miscopied verses, and your oddly comforting guilt. The codex is back, the mystery is resolved, the shelves are quiet, and yet, your thoughts are not. You find yourself walking, almost automatically, through the dim hallway that leads to the chapel. Your sandals whisper against the stones. The lamp in your hand trembles just enough to cast tiny shadows that flicker along the walls, saints in motion. Perhaps, or just the day's residue playing tricks on your tired eyes. The chapel is empty, save for a single votive candle flickering near the altar. Its flame casts a golden halo over the worn wood, and the scent of old incense still lingers in the air, sweet, smoky, like myrrh and memory. You settle onto the cool stone bench near the rear pew, the one you always choose when you don't want to be seen. You lean forward, rest your forearms on your knees, and just breathe for a moment. In, out, soft, measured, heavy with the weight of things not spoken aloud. You glance up at the crucifix, carved from dark walnut. The face of Christ here is calm, almost tired, not tragic, not pained, just weary. It's a face you understand. You reach into your robe and pull out a folded slip of parchment, an error you made 2 weeks ago. You'd copied a verse from the Psalms and swapped a single letter. One tiny letter. Instead of, he heals the brokenhearted, you wrote, he heats the brokenhearted. A kind of holy chili pepper. You chuckle softly, then sigh. Historians still debate whether these mistakes were seen as grave spiritual errors or simply occupational hazards. In your case, it depends on the day. Today, it feels like both. You kneel, tucking the slip beside the prayer bench, a quiet offering to divine patience. Then, softly, you begin to speak, not aloud, but inside, the way one speaks to silence. You speak of the scroll you never finished, of the word you miscopied and never corrected, of the page you accidentally tore and glued back with egg white, hoping no one would notice. You speak of the codex that went missing, and the suspicion that you felt coil in your gut when the abbot looked at you too long. And, more guiltily, you admit how often you've written verses with one eye on the clock bell. Your mind already wandering to lunch. You let it all rise, swirl, and slowly settle, because here, in this hush, there is no audience, no judgment, just the sound of stone breathing and your own heart making peace with imperfection. You stare at your hands, ink-stained, calloused, weathered like the spine of a beloved codex. These hands have held centuries, have copied the words of men long dead, have mended pages that might otherwise have vanished. They have also smudged, scratched, and occasionally dripped wax on sacred margins. And yet, they still work. You clasp them together now, fingers interlocking like woven reeds. Forgive me, you whisper, for the verses I got wrong, and for the ones I rushed. You hear a creak behind you. Footsteps, hesitant. You don't turn. You know them. Brother Stephanos settles beside you, folding himself into a sitting position with the grace of someone who rarely sits on anything not made of wood and rules. He says nothing for a while. Then, I once translated a passage of Job as, he weeps into his lentils. You look at him. It was supposed to be, he weeps into his hands, he clarifies. You both sit with that. Then you chuckle. So does he. Lentils are biblical. You offer. Deeply so. He nods. Also absorbent. Silence again. Then, more quietly, he asks, do you ever feel like the more we copy, the more we forget what we were trying to remember? You nod. All the time. Another pause. Still, he says, I think the saints forgive our spelling. I hope so. You murmur. The votive candle flickers. A breeze slips through the cracks in the stone and brushes your face like a soft rebuke, or a blessing. It's hard to tell. Sometimes, you both sit a while longer, saying nothing, watching light dance across the carved arch of the apse. Finally, Stephanos rises. Back to the scribbles? You smile faintly. Back to the scribbles. He leaves, and you remain a moment longer. Just long enough to whisper one more thought into the silence. Let my errors be gentle, and my corrections honest. Then you rise, stretch your knees, and step back into the hall. The scriptorium waits, and you, tired but lighter, walk toward it. Ink-stained hands, steady heart, clear eyes. You finally drift off in the library alcove, wrapped in a robe, dreaming of dragons and dusty pages. The scriptorium is quiet again. Not silent, never silent, but resting. Like an old cat curled around a warm hearth. Eyes half-lidded, humming to itself in candlelight. You extinguish the final lamp with a puff of breath. The smoke curls upward, a single ribbon spiraling into the beams above. The hour is indecent. Even the bats outside have retired. You should have done the same an hour ago. Maybe two, but your feet won't carry you back to your cell tonight. Instead, you drift toward the alcove, tucked between the scroll shelf labeled miscellaneous devotional fragments and the cabinet that houses broken wax seals and mysterious keys. The alcove isn't even a proper room, just a hollow, an architectural shrug, but to you, it's sanctuary. You lay your robe down across the low bench like a makeshift blanket and nestle in sideways. The bench creaks under your weight and welcomes you anyway. Above, the moonlight slips through the high window like a thread pulled through fabric. Silver and faint, you let your eyes follow its path as it traces the edges of the stone walls. The curve of an overturned inkwell. The spine of a half-finished psalter. Everything looks softer in the dark. Your muscles unspool one by one. The weight of the day, the arguments. The rain, the missing codex. The guilt that still clings like parchment dust, eases. Not vanishes, but loosens, like a knot that's been soaking in warm water. You let your hand fall to your side, fingertips brushing a forgotten scrap of vellum. You smile, too tired to check what it says. Probably a grocery list from the 9th century. Or a terrible poem. Same thing. Really. You turn onto your side, pulling your robe over your shoulder like a cocoon. The air is cool. Your breath makes small clouds that rise and vanish. Your thoughts blur at the edges. And then, without ceremony, sleep arrives. Not all at once. First, your hands go still. Then your thoughts slow from words to shapes. Then colors. Then dreams. In the dream, you're still in the scriptorium. But the scrolls breathe. Literally. They expand and contract like lungs. The candlelight moves of its own accord, hopping between shelves like a curious bird. You walk through the aisles, barefoot, each step echoing softly. The floor is covered in moss. Golden beetles crawl lazily across the open pages. One of them tips its head at you. You nod back, naturally. Then a voice, not loud, but ancient, calls your name. You turn to see a dragon. Not massive, not menacing, just tired, coiled around the philosophy section. Have you found the missing chapter? It asks. You shake your head, still looking. It nods. Smoke trails from its nostrils and forms letters in the air. You try to read them, but they twist into fish, then into tiny monks, then into stars. You sit beside the dragon and rest your head against its scales. They smell like cedar and ink. And you sleep deeper. And now, the scriptorium fades. The ink dries. The scrolls sleep. The last candle, far in the corner, lets out a soft breath and goes dark. The night stretches gently around the stones. Everything stills. No beetles stir. No novices sneak. Even the ghosts of forgotten words go quiet. You lie curled in the alcove, wrapped in wool, your dreams caught somewhere between herbals and angels. The distant owl outside the chapel window hoots once, soft, slow, final. The walls hold you like an old memory. Your breath is slow, deep, unhurried. Whatever was lost today can be found tomorrow. Whatever was wrong can be copied over. And whatever guilt still lingers has been folded into parchment, sealed with wax, and set gently aside. Your fingers twitch once, as if still tracing a line of script in your sleep. Then still, the monastery exhales with you. Its stones grow warmer. Its silence, kinder. There will always be more verses, more annotations, more debates about Latin logic and goat metaphors. But for now, all that matters is rest. Ink-stained hands, quiet breath, sacred dust. You are safe here. You are known here. You are home. Sleep, librarian. Sleep.